Okay, well, let's give this a shot. I've been messing with iPhone's internal camera app, and I thought I had a pretty good setup for what I'm about to do, which is record what you're looking at right now is the velvet cover of my Mahjong table. Here it is. And a couple of my favorite Mahjong books, which I use to study to try to get better at the game. My initial plan was to use my AirPods as mic, so when I sit down, the audio is still perfectly clear. And as I will be fairly distant from my phone, I don't know if my voice will be picked up properly. So I'll record the video, and if it seems like the voice is too low, because I'm standing far away from iPhone's internal camera and microphone, then I'll just scrap the video. Regardless, let's get this started. I've been meaning to do this for a while, not only to do a showcase of my Mahjong table, doing a full sorting of the tiles, which I'm not going to do right now because it's a little bit late at night and the tiles make a whole bunch of clacking sounds when they're getting mixed inside the table, and also when you have to push them inside the table. But what I will do now is go over some of my studying material that I've used over the years to get better at Mahjong. So, to start with, I put probably the most important book in Riichi Mahjong, which is called Riichi Book 1. I affectionately call this book, hold on, give me a second. This is a very important book in Mahjong, especially for Western players. There hadn't been many Mahjong resources before Riichi Book 1 came out, and then Chiba wrote it, and it's absolutely free, by the way. The only reason I have a physical version is because I prefer to have books in physical versions, so I can focus more properly. If I'm sitting down at my computer, my tendency is to start playing and queuing up instead of reading and studying. So I printed all of this shit out to use a little bit of stationery, get my highlights in, and study and all that. Affectionately, I refer to this book, the Riichi Book 1, as the Marie Kondo version of Mahjong. It's like, it has a bunch of basic tips that everyone who is following them is probably thriving way more than they were before reading the book. They are simple, but sometimes people just don't use them, and once they read these books, they're, well, in the case of Marie Kondo, their home lives will be improved. In the case of Riichi Book 1, your Mahjong will be improved. But anyway, with all that aside, I am going to, I think 3 times might be a bit much. Nah, 3 times sounds about right. So you can see the stuff that I've lighted in the books, because I'm not going to go chapter by chapter. I will simply look at the highlights that I've done over the years and return to from time to time. Whether I'm doing good or badly, they are always good reminders, and I like to keep them in mind. So that's why I've highlighted them in red. So let's get started, and hopefully the mic can still pick up my voice from a fair distance away. I'm going to sit down at my Mahjong table right now and open up one of these books. Because my light source is right behind me, I'm going to be slightly a bit tilted to the right, but let's crank open this bad boy and see what kind of highlights were deemed important enough for me to jot them down. You might have also noticed that underneath Riichi Book 1, there are other very important books to me, especially this one. This is I believe, the second or the third What Would You Do book by Ji Uzaku, which has a bunch of cases that you might find playing Mahjong. It will present you with a problem and then say which tile would you discard in this situation. You make your decision and then in the next page read whether your decision was right according to Ji Uzaku, and they'll give you an explanation as to why you should have discarded that tile. If you got it right, then you probably already are on the right track. If you got it wrong, then you just learned something new. And books like this, full of WWIDs, are good for practicing hands that you might often come across playing Mahjong in any client. We are not going to start with this book today. I just wanted to show you the 4 more important books that I have for Riichi Mahjong, and they were important enough that I got them printed, even though there are PDFs online freely available for all of them. Then there's of course this is more kind of a mathematical, analytical approach to Riichi Mahjong, which I'm again not going to get into today, but a pretty decent book. I've made a couple of highlights here that I like to keep in mind. It is Riichi Mahjong Strategy by Nemata and Fukuchi Makoto. They are well-known names in the Mahjong sphere in Japan, and this one is the final boss of all Mahjong books. Even though it was the first book released by Ji Uzaku with WWIDs, or What Would You Do these cards, it's actually a very difficult book beyond the first few questions, and it's generally strongly recommended that you start with his third, which is this. This is his third book. This one has easier questions and answers, and will serve you definitely better in most cases rather than this one, which is more like an exercise in how difficult Mahjong can be, rather than a practical way for you to improve. Okay, so with that, all of that out of the way, which I don't know if I even keep in the video, since we're looking at Riichi Book 1, let's start flipping through the pages and see what I deemed important enough to highlight in red. This is not an introduction to Riichi Book 1. If you need to read the book, go ahead and do it. Look it up online. It's free. You can get a PDF anywhere. From Daina Chiba himself, actually. He wrote it and provided it for free. So if you have, maybe not if you're a beginner, but if you have more than a beginner, like a mild interest in Mahjong, I would definitely recommend reading this book from start to finish. It will make a great difference in your gameplay. And if you're stuck in silver or in gold in Mahjong Soul, after reading this, you should be able to improve a lot faster. Now, let me start by saying that the first chapter of this book contains a tutorial on how to sign up for an archaic client that used to be the Riichi Mahjong standard in the world, called Tenho. This book was written a while ago, so nowadays we can't. I can't say this for sure because Mahjong Soul is the standard for most Riichi Mahjong players will flock to Mahjong Soul, so it makes sense to make a tutorial on how to use Mahjong Soul, even though it's so easy to use that you don't even need a tutorial to begin with. But once we get to the Tenho chapter, we will just skip that one altogether. I think I have exactly one highlight in that chapter, which is quite lengthy because the site is Japanese, so Dainachibi is teaching you how to sign up to a Japanese site. So we're going to skip that ahead. However, right here at the start, I have my first highlight. And the first highlight says, take a look at player statistics. Now, this is important because in most Mahjong clients, and sadly not in Final Fantasy XIV, although you can record your own gameplay and use it in a similar fashion, you actually, at the end of the match, you get a log of the match. So you can take a look at how the game played out, not only from your own perspective, but from the perspective of every player on the table, play by play. You should, if you have enough time on your hands, let's just say it that way, from time to time you should look at your logs, especially if you were unsure at any given point of the game if you made the right move or not. At the end of the game, go to the log and see what else you could have done to improve your gameplay. So, in short, look at logs. Mahjong Soul has it, Riichi City has it as well, although it has a daily number of uses which is tied to gacha, obviously. They found a way to tie logs to gacha mechanics. I'll give them that. That's pretty creative. And Tenho has that as well. Final Fantasy XIV, you can't do that, although you can record your own gameplay and look back on that as well. Not from the perspective of other players, though. The second highlight here would be parts 2 and 3 are the meat of the book. This means that we are going to skip the Tenho section entirely, or almost entirely. Because it's not that I hate playing on Tenho or that I think the interface is not beautiful enough or it's archaic or anything of that sort. It's just that Mahjong Soul has grown to such a degree that it eventually will overtake. Think of it like a forum that you used to that used to be your main source for one of your hobbies, but then Reddit appeared or a group on Facebook appeared, which ended up being way more useful than the forum that you started on. Tenho is kind of like a relic from the past. Some hardcore players, especially older ones, will die on that hill and say that Tenho is the best client to play on, but I think it's just a matter of time before Tenho dies out and Mahjong Soul takes the Riichi Mahjong monopoly, including pro players, IRL players. In fact, they have such a high number of matches played at the highest lobby that they even launched, I'm talking about Mahjong Soul, their own AI analysis tool recently. So I think Tenho's days are kind of numbered. So personally, I choose to not to get too involved into it, although I've made a couple of some progress in Tenho, but I don't intend to dedicate much of my time to it. Regardless, I did make an important note here, I remember here. At the start of the Tenho chapter, there's this part which says, another advantage of online playing specifically is that you can easily keep the record of your playing history and obtain detailed statistics from all games you play again. Going back to the things I was saying about logs. Look back at your logs if you have time. Try to understand why you dealt in, why someone dealt into your hand is also important, because sometimes people win a hand and they don't even realize why the wrong button appeared. Take a look at your logs. Okay, so since I'm pretty sure this is the only highlight I have in the entire Tenho chapter, let me stop yapping for a while and go to the meat of the book. Basic tile efficiency. Let's see what we have here. So right off the bat, I believe this whole paragraph is kind of important to keep in mind. It is possible that after you decided on the 5 pins and 8 pins weight, your opponents end up not discarding the 5 pins or 8 pins at all, which would be a Rianmen weight, while discarding lots of 4s and 6s, right? Including the 4 of a different suit. This is the kind of thing that will often happen in Mahjong or any game of luck for that matter. When things like this happen, do not think that you made a bad call. You didn't. You made the right choice, but you were just unlucky. So keep that in mind, that no matter what, how good your weight is, even if it's a 4-sided weight with a whole bunch of dials that you can get a sumo off, or that you can run somebody else off and demolish their points, sometimes it will just go to a draw, and that's the nature of playing a luck game. They can miss the mark every single time, and you will not be able to get your winning hand. So keep this in mind. You can't make a correct choice every single time and still lose. This is what Mahjong is all about. And not just Mahjong. I have to say, Mahjong is fairly kind in this regard, because if you have played other luck games like, I don't know, Texas Hold'em Poker or Gin Rummy, these luck factors a lot more into those games than it actually does into Riichi Mahjong, where there's other types of skill expression. All right, let's see what the next highlight is. Okay, with N away hands, this can be I Shanten or Yan Shanten, basically however tiles you are away from Tenpai. However, you have to rely almost solely on the tiles you draw yourself to advance your hand. Therefore, in choosing a discard from a 2 away hand or Ryan Shanten, we should try not to make for an I Shanten hand with too small tile acceptance. And what this hint is trying to tell you is that sometimes getting to I Shanten as fast as possible is not the best way to progress your hand, because a Ryan Shanten or 2 away hand can have more potential with the draw, with the next draw that you do, than a draw that will, for example, you can have a Ryan Shanten, draw something, and then be I Shanten in something that will have you on the 3-sided weight, or you can blindly pursue an I Shanten that will lead you to a Tenpai that has you waiting on the 5 of bamboos, for example. Here, the general tip is, do not try to take shortcuts to get into Tenpai. You can balance out I Shanten and Ryan Shanten depending on what you think your Tenpai will eventually be. This is on the chapter of closed weight versus edge weight, in other words, Kanchan versus Panchan. I highlighted here, however, closed weight proto-runs are superior to edge weight ones because they can more easily evolve into a side weight proto-run. So what this means is that With closed weights, let's say for example a 6 and an 8 of bamboos, and let's say that you're in tenpai, you're waiting for that 7, but that 7 is unlikely to come out. Maybe there are already a bunch of 7s out on the table and there's only a single 7 that you can win from. You can improve this 6-8 kanchan by drawing a 5, because if you draw a 5, then suddenly your tenpai goes from winning off a single 7, but you also can win off of the 4. So you'd rather have a kanchan in your hand, in short, you'd rather have a kanchan in your hand than a penchan, because you can improve your weights with kanchan, and penchan is a lot more difficult to improve. There's a lot of good reading material here. I'm just going into the highlights that, because obviously, even though this is considered the essential Mahjong reading, you can't keep this whole book, entire book in your head, unless you're like you've been doing this for years and already know every single word that there is in it. So I try to keep the highlighted red stuff in my mind at all times rather than all of its contents. This is on the topic of complex shapes. And the next highlight that I have here is, therefore, when we draw a tile next to the head, which the head is another word they use for pair. When we draw a tile next to the head, creating a side weight proto-run, we should keep it and break the double closed shape instead. Here. The next one is also one of my favorites. 4 tile complex shapes. The Nobetan. I mentioned the Nobetan constantly in my videos. If you've been watching them, you've probably noticed that I always keep an eye out for Nobetan. A Nobetan is like a stretched single shape. Try to keep a stretched single shape if a hand has one. For example, a 3, a 4, a 5, and a 6 of the same suit. In particular, oh, there it is. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 4, 5, 6, 7 should be kept until the hand becomes ready, tenpai, or ishanten. The reason for this is that if your hand progresses in such a way that you're able to get plenty of sequences, and one of those sequences happens to be this stretched single shape, and you don't have a pair in your hand, at the end, your tenpai, you will be waiting on a tanki weight, which is a pair weight. And by having this type of elongated shape, 3, 4, 5, 6, if you draw a 3, you'll win with a pair of 3s and then a sequence of the 4, 5, 6. If you draw or run somebody from their 6, you will win with the sequence of the 3, 4, 5 and get the win of the tanki 6. Alright, next complex shape. Here, we should keep the 3 of pins and discard the 3 instead. This is because the 3 is part of a skipping shape, but 3 is an isolated floating tile. It's a pretty fairly simple tip, but when you have, let's say, we should keep a 3. We're looking at this hand here above, and this is a very specific example. You have this hand, and then it's your turn, and you draw the 3. The 3 is much more useful as a floating tile because it's only one tile away from this sequence than the 3, which is like 3, 7, and 8. 3, 7, 8 is not good. You should get rid of this 3 more easily than you should the 3 next to this 5. So let's read that again. We should keep the 3 here next to this 5 and discard the 3 which is far away from the 7 and the 8. This is because the 3 is part of a skipping shape. This is what they call a skipping shape, when there's a sequence and then one of these tiles is only one tile away from the sequence, but the 3 is completely isolated from the others in the same suit. Here I have highlighted this whole table just because it seems fairly useful in terms of odds. 5 basic weights. You have the Ryanman, the Shanpon, the Kanchan, the Penshan, and the Tanki, and then acceptance in order to transform your Tenpai into a winning hand. So as you can see, the side weight Ryanman has the highest chance to win, which is followed by a dual pawn weight or a Shanpon, which is followed by a Kanchan. And yes, the Shanpon is a better weight than a closed weight Kanchan. Then below the Kanchan, even worse, is the Penshan, which is why I always tend to discard them. And finally, the Tanki weight, which is the pair weight, is more of a Hail Mary type of weight. If you have nothing else, if you have called a bunch of stuff and you end up waiting on a pair and you have no other choice but to wait on the pair, then you go for the Tanki weight. But keep that in mind. Ryanman, good. Shanpon, also good. Closed weight Kanchan, if it's at the edge of any given suit, it could catch somebody, but it's generally not very reliable. And the Penshan, of course, sucks almost as much as the Tanki. The next note that I made here, let me take a look at it first. I don't remember this one. Regular 3-way side weight. Oh, okay. This is a note on 3-sided weights. Here, for example, you have in this suit, the suit of characters, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, and the 6. If you are in Tenpai and are waiting on any given tile here to win, you can win off the 1 here, completing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you draw the 4, you can complete 2, 3, 4, and then have the 4, 5, 6 to win your hand. And if you end up drawing a 7, you complete the 5, 6, 7, and already have the 2, 3, 4 in your hand. When you have one of these elongated shapes, as I like to call them, this is called the 3-sided weight, and is one of the better Tenpais that you can have. Especially if there's Dora involved in this suit. This is one of the best weights that you can have, a 3-sided weight. Alright, let me just unfold this temporarily. This is a bunch of glossary stuff. Riichi book is written in such a way that every single move has been translated into English. So some of us are used to play Mahjong with a mix of Japanese yakus and English names. I think most people do that. This one is written entirely in English. Some of the other books are written entirely in Japanese. And each client seems to use a mix of terminology in Japanese and English. So it really depends on what book you're reading and what client you're playing. Now this next one is the 5-block method. The 5-block method is used because your hand needs 5 melds to win, including a pair. So if you're at any given point, if you're looking at your hand and you don't have 5 shapes, you should make your way and discard in such a way. You should make your way towards having 5 shapes in your hand. So what Dynachiba here is saying is identify 5 tile blocks in a hand. Try to make sure there is no block that is too weak, and each block has at most 3 tiles. The 5-block method is in an entire chapter, which is quite substantial in playing Mahjong. Some of the older pros will argue with you and make a case for having 6 shapes in your hand, but nowadays I think the 5-block method is pretty much standard and will get you the optimal results. Again, I'm not going to read every single thing in the book, just the highlight that made the most sense to me. Now, how do we select these tile blocks? In selecting which tile blocks to keep and which ones to discard, we focus on the combination of the 3 following criteria. Tile efficiency, so go back to that table that we took a look at earlier with the Ryanman, the Shanpon, Kanchan, Penchan, and Tanki. Tile efficiency is at first, hand value, and then the safety of tiles to be discarded. All of these factors should influence your decision making towards making a winning hand. The next note that I have here, let's see. In selecting tile blocks, we should try to achieve the best balance between speed and hand value. This is I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but basically what he's trying to say is don't try to keep a shape that is highly inefficient just because it has Dora, or don't build a hand that's highly efficient but will only get you Tanyao. That's basically the gist of it. Keep a balance of shapes in your hand that will, some of them give you value, others are simply quick to get you towards Tenpai. More on the 5-block method, that chapter is pretty important. I recommend everyone to read it. Let's see here. Pursuing Yaku, of course, the bane of our existence, making Yaku in order to win our hands. In modern Riichi Mahjong, the value of pursuing expensive Yaku is much diminished because of red 5s. This is true. You don't have to make a Ryan Peiko, which is a twice pure double sequence, just to have a Gigantamax hand and get a lot of Han out of a single Yaku, because odds are a hand with Pinfu, Tanyao, Riichi, and two red Doras and another Dora, for example, or if you're lucky, even get another Uradora, that can easily get you a Haneman, and you didn't have to work too hard to build expensive Yaku. You simply called Riichi, acquired Pinfu, acquired Tanyao, a whole bunch of Dora, and suddenly you got yourself a Haneman. So what this is telling you basically is don't go for the Yakuman. You don't need Yakuman to win, first of all. and you don't need some of the most expensive and rarest yaku to win at this game. And it continues here. We can achieve the same hand value more easily with Riichi plus Dora and 1 red 5. Because Dora has such a huge influence in the way that the scoring is done for most players, you don't have to have gigantic yakus in your hand to be able to win at this game. That being said, always trying to maximize tile efficiency without regard for yaku is not the best strategy either. For example, when you are ranked 4th in South 4 and the player who is currently ranked 3rd has 10,000 more points than you do, you should aim for Mangan Tsumo or Haneman Ron to improve the placement. So what he's doing here is that in a neutral state where you're just starting to play and everyone's points are roughly the same, it's not as important to pursue expensive yaku because you are not down bad on points and don't have to overcome anyone to get out of last, for example. You can win with less value, keep the game rolling, and still end up in a decent position by the end. However, if you find yourself in the unlucky situation of being in last and far behind other players, that's when you should start making Hail Mary plays, such as going for fully outside hands, twice pure double sequences, full flushes, like closed full flushes, where if you open the full flush, it's only a mangan because it's 5 han. But if you decide to keep it closed, suddenly it turns into a haneman. And if it's a flush, you should probably, if you're in last, try to do the flush in the suit of the door, so you can even get more value out of it. Or even if it's not a full flush, if it's a half flush, and you have 2 Dora in honors or dragons, you should keep those around because they will add considerable more value to it. In short, when you're close in points to other players, try to keep your hands efficient more than valuable, and when you're falling behind, whether by unluck or whether by fumbling, try to chase the expensive yaku. Always trying to maximize tile efficiency without regard for yaku is not the best strategy either. Okay, we already went through this. I've been yapping for a while. I don't know if I can get... We're already halfway through the book. I tried to make my highlights not too long because they all tie up. All of the highlights tie to other knowledge that I have already acquired from this book. So when I remember a highlight, I remember the things that are closely attached to it. And so one thing leads to another, and suddenly I'm reminded of everything that I need to be reminded of in any given situation. Here, this chapter doesn't have any highlights, but it highlights a bunch of crossroads between chasing different types of yakus. For example, Itsu or Toy versus Chitoi. There are crossroads that can help you decide which yaku you should go for. I have not highlighted any of this stuff here because I have my own pet superstitions that depend from game to game, and I'd rather rely on them. However, interestingly enough, I actually have made a note on this. Specifically, Toy, which is all pawn, versus Chitoi 2, otherwise known as simply Chitoi, which is 7 pairs. Choose 7 pairs in the following situations. There is a futile pair in your hand. There is no pair of value tiles in your hand. There are 3 or more pairs of simple tiles between 3 and 7 in your hand. This is usually because if all of your pairs are simples and they are not terminals, you can combine 7 pairs with Tanyao, for example. You can combine 7 pairs with Dora. It's not unusual for people to get out of all of the 7 pairs that they have in their hand, 2 of them will be Dora. Maybe even one of them will be a pair of the 5s, and one of the 5s will be the red 5. So there's a lot of synergy between Chitoi and other Yaku or Dora. The next note here is, if there is 1 or more futile pair in your hand, you must stick with Chitoi. If not, you can go for Toi Toi. Seems to be self-explanatory. Self-explanatory as long as you keep in mind that Chitoi is 7 pairs and Toi Toi is all pawn. Don't forget this, especially if you play Final Fantasy XIV, because they have English names for everything. They actually have even translated all of the Yaku into French and German. And I've seen people who play in German and French, so good luck memorizing that as well. Let's see. In this chapter, what we have here. Count the number of Han. Okay, first you need to figure out how many Han a hand has. If a hand has 5 or more Han, skip step 2 and go directly to step 3. If not, proceed to step 2. Figuring out the mini points here is only important if your hand has 5 Han or less, because a mangan, depending on the mini points that you have, and this can vary with a lot of factors, such as if you can't, if you tsumoed, if one of your Yaku is pinfu. All of these things can determine the final scoring of your mangan, which goes up to 5 Han. But above 5 Han, it's pretty simple. If you're not the dealer, you get a Haneman, for example, will always be 12,000, the Baiman will be 16,000, and yeah. So you should keep, it's more important to keep count of the number of Han, just to see how valuable your hand will be by the time you win it. And here you go. Here's a handy table here that I've underlined. If you are a non-dealer and you run somebody with a 5 Han mangan, you get 8,000 points. If you're the dealer, you get 12,000 points. These are the tsumo payouts. If you are the dealer and someone gets a tsumo mangan, they will have to pay for 4,000 points. If you are the non-dealer, you only get to pay 2,000 points. 6 to 7 Han is Haneman, which corresponds always to 12,000 points as a non-dealer if you run. And as a dealer, you also get, whether you run or tsumu, you will always get 18,000 points. A Baiman as a non-dealer will be 16,000, and for a dealer will be 24,000, and etc. etc. These ones are the rarest ones that you will seldom come across, especially if it's a counted Yakuman. I guess if you have a shitload of Dora, you can get to Yakuman, a counted Yakuman, more easily than if you don't. Proceeding to my next notes, should be close to the end at this point, because this is scoring. This is something that you should get down to brass tacks, so to speak. Just memorize the the scoring, especially for mangans, for non-dealer and dealer mangans, and which yaku affect the mangans more one way or another, and figure out your mini points. Scans can also change your mini points and stuff like that. There is not much point in highlighting this, you simply have to memorize scoring for mangans, that's about it. Now for Riichi Judgment. This is especially important in Final Fantasy XIV. And I say this because if you have played this interface, and to be fair, this happens in a lot of clients, it's not only Final Fantasy XIV. Let's not forget that not everyone is a tryhard, and people play Mahjong for fun. This game is called Riichi Mahjong, and most people get a kick out of just slamming the Riichi button, regardless of it being the right choice or not. But if you're tryharding and you want to get good at making good Riichi calls, here's a tip. Therefore, one of our top priorities in playing Riichi Mahjong is to try to make the hand ready as fast as possible and call Riichi before anyone else does. At the same time, however, there are situations where you should keep Dama, i.e. not calling Riichi when having a closed ready hand. And then it goes in like the merits of Riichi. This is what you lose by calling Riichi, what you lose by doing an irresponsible Riichi with a shit weight versus making a Riichi with a Mega Rian Man and stuff like that. Although calling Riichi means that you can no longer play defensively by choosing safe tiles to discard. This is a big one. If you ever played this game, you have probably noticed, even if you're a novice, that once you click the Riichi button, the game goes into automatic mode. You are a certain number of tiles away from winning, and until you can draw your winning tile or someone else discards the tile that you need to win, you are locked into that hand when you call Riichi. So if you have a bad Riichi with core weight, you should probably wait before calling Riichi. Try to improve your weight to a Rianman and then slam the Riichi button. Riichi Judgment. Choose Riichi over Dama if at least one of the following three conditions is met. Your hand has at least one Han other than Riichi. So no Riichi Nomi. I made a small note for myself here because I don't consider, for example, Riichi and Tanyao to be enough worth to slam the Riichi button immediately. I feel more safe with a Dora in my hand. For example, Riichi, Tanyao, and two Dora is much better than just Riichi Nomi. Your hand has a good weight and you are the dealer, because if you are the dealer, even if you have a poorly valuable hand, the dealer always gets more points anyway, so they can get more use out of low scoring hands. Although I think he actually, when in point 1, when he says your hand has at least one Han other than Riichi, he makes a good point here, because you can have a Riichi Nomi with 3 Dora in your hand, and Riichi is your only Yaku, because Dora don't count as Yaku, but you can still slam that Riichi button, because even though you have no other Yaku in your hand, your Dora are already guaranteed to give you a highly valuable Mangan, for example. So my 2 note here is more like, do a Riichi But if it's a Riichi with 1 Dora, don't do it. If it's a Riichi with 2 Dora, for example, or Riichi Tanyao 1 Dora, then slam it. Of course, this book continues to go into a variety of specific cases that you can look at yourself online. I've made a question mark here, and I don't remember why anymore. Let's take a look at this. Riichi judgment for Chitoi. Riichi any Chitoi hand if waiting for Dora. Now, this I'm not sure I still entirely agree with, even though I've made these notes like close to a year ago. I still stand by this question mark over here. The reason why I say that is because Chitoi can be extremely valuable if you can draw the Dora that you need in Tenpai, or if someone else discards it. But the moment you call Riichi, someone is immediately less likely to throw out any Dora. Even if they have no idea that you're going for Chitoi, they probably wouldn't want to deal in with their Dora, so they're going to keep it closely guarded. Your best chance of waiting for Dora in a Chitoi is if you Tsumo, and in that case it would require yet another extra layer of luck, which I don't like to rely upon. I actually prefer to call Riichi for 7 pairs when I already have Dora in my hand, but I am not waiting for any Dora. So, for example, let's take, for example, a red 5. I have a red 5 in my hand, and I'm in Tenpai with this red 5. If the other player only has a normal 5 in their hand, they are much more likely to discard that 5 than they are to discard the red 5. So in that case, I would rather Riichi for 7 pairs with the red 5 already in my hand, rather than waiting for that red 5. And the red 5 line of thinking goes for any other Dora in play. I understand the value of doing Riichi while waiting for Dora, especially if you can get a Tsumo, but I don't agree with the odds of actually completing that Chitoi. I've seen it happen. I mean, I've played thousands of games of this of Mahjong, so I've seen anything happen. It could happen, but it doesn't seem very likely. And I wouldn't rely on those odds, especially if I had to win the game. Now, here's another important one. A reason to keep Dama? Bad weight. Call Riichi if there are 3 or more winning tiles left in the board. Go Dama if there are only 1 or 2 simple tiles left to win on. This one is pretty self-evident as well. If you have managed to get to Tenpai, and this is called the Hell weight, and there's a single tile in the entire game, for example, let's say there's a single 7 that you can win your hand from, do not call that Riichi. Instead, transform your Tenpai into a different kind of weight that doesn't rely on waiting on that Hell weight, the 7 of any given suit that you would need to win. Wait to transform, instead of slamming Riichi immediately, keep your hand in Dama, wait to draw a better tile to get a Tenpai with better weights, and then slam the Riichi button. This is why sometimes you see people, especially in clients where Tsumo Giri is grayed out, sometimes people will do a bunch of Tsumogiri discards over and over and over and over and over again, and eventually they will slam the Riichi button, That means that reveals to you and the table that they have a bad weight. They were hoping to draw into a better weight and then call Riichi, but then they waited for so long that their patience ran out, and eventually they called Riichi and finally placed their hopes on winning that hand on the one difficult tile that they have to acquire to win it. Hopefully that was not too convoluted of an explanation, but Dama can be better than immediately calling Riichi is what I'm essentially trying to say. Okay, this should almost be done by now. I'm a little bit tired of yapping. Riichi judgment for an expensive head. Riichi if you are far behind from other players, of course, because Riichi can dramatically increase the value of your hand if you win it. You can also get Ipatsu. You can also transform a hand that has a terminal that is otherwise unwinnable, but the moment you call Riichi, it turns into potentially into a winning hand. Riichi if it is the 6th turn or before and the weight is Rianchanten side weight or better. Riichi if it is the 10th turn or before and the weight is 3-way side weight or better. Don't Riichi if the minimum hand value is Animan or better. And the reason for doing this is that beyond a certain point, the extra hands given to you by Riichi are not worth dealing in by calling Riichi. If you already have a Haneman or a Baiman's worth of value in your hand and you don't even need to call Riichi and lock your hand and start discarding dangerous tiles, you can keep your hand closed. You don't have to win that Haneman, you don't have to win that Baiman in your hand, and your opponents won't know that you're in Tenpai and are more likely to deal in. So you can fold if you have to before calling Riichi, and you might catch your opponents off guard and be able to run them without them even knowing that you are in Tenpai. That is if you already have Gigantamax value in your hand without a Riichi, like with the Haneman or higher. Defense Judgment, this should be the interesting one. Push Fold Judgment. When another player has a ready hand, push if two of the following conditions are met. This is one of Yu Song's favorite tables to pull up. He keeps putting these on his videos all the time. So if you're a Yu Song watcher, you have probably seen this enough, like at least throughout the last 400 videos that he has made. But let's go over it again. Push Fold Judgment. When another player has a ready hand, push if two of the following conditions are met. If you have a ready hand and a high scoring hand, but you have a bad weight, slam the Riichi button. If you have a ready hand and a good weight, but it's kind of low scoring, you can also pursue it. Because at least if you win, it keeps the game moving along and you prevent someone else from getting a gigantic hand themselves. You stop the game before that possibility even happens. And this is for pushing. For folding, if two of the following conditions are met: Ishan 10 or worse hand, low scoring hand, and bad weight. Seems pretty self-explanatory. If in any of these conditions, when someone calls Riichi or someone has a sussy Dama 10 and you think they could win off of you, start folding. Here they go into a bunch of defensive basics. Genbutsu and other absolutely safe tiles can be, for example, imagine if someone on the table called Riichi and they discarded the 7. You have a 7 of bamboos. You have a 7 of bamboos in your hand, and the most important thing to you to do at this point, you are already far ahead in the game. You have the highest amount of points, you just want the game to win. If they discarded the 7 of bamboos, you better discard the 7 of bamboos yourself next, because it is 100% safe and you will never lose if you do that. Genbutsu is pretty much one of the few, if not the only, defensive technique that always works 100% of the time. Sadly, you cannot always use it because you run out of genbutsu tiles, but keep that in mind. Now, understanding suji, I could go into a short explanation of suji. Let's see if I made any highlights suji-wise here. I haven't, but I already understand the concept of suji, so we'll go into it briefly. Suji is basically an interval of 3. So, for example, if someone discards the 7, they call Riichi and discard the 7. If you discard and they have discarded the 1 before that 7, that means they don't have a 5, 6 weight in their hand. So you can discard the 4 safely, knowing that you won't deal in. And if they have discarded the 1 as well as the 7, that means you won't deal in if you discard the 4, because they can't have the 2, 3 weight in their hand. Suji is a concept that I won't get into here much, but understand these 3 very important defensive techniques. Genbutsu, 100% safe. Suji can be very safe if it's inside suji, for example 147. If it's half suji, only 4-7, it's less safe, but still better than throwing out a random tile, I'll tell you that much. And there was a blockade highlight here, I believe, in one of the few next pages. A blockade, there it is. A blockade means that 4 of the same tiles in the same suit have already been discarded. So, for example, if you see on the table that, let's take for example, the 3 you see 3 of characters have been discarded and they're all on the table, and someone is close to winning. You know that because all of the 3s are visible, you know for sure that they can't win off of the 3 because all of the 3s have already been discarded. There is no fifth 3 that they can win off from. So another defensive technique to keep in mind is kabe, which is called a wall. A kabe is a complete wall. There's also one chance kabe where 3 tiles have been discarded, not the 4, but kabe is pretty useful as well as a defensive technique. And what's this one? There you go. Even have a safety ranking chart here. You should probably look this up on the PDF. Of all the defensive techniques that Daina Chiba talks about in this book, you have ones that are ranked from 100% to basically D tier. The only defensive technique that is 100% safe is a genbutsu. Then there is a AAA rank, which is 4th suji terminal and 4th honor tile, AA ranks, etc. It goes down from genbutsu to suji to first honor tiles and non-suji terminals, etc. It's a pretty this is on page 202, and it's safety ranking tiles for defensive techniques. I would recommend you looking into it. And holy shit, I'm getting a little bit tired of yapping, so thank God this is almost at the end. Tiles outside early discards. Tiles that are outside those discarded in early turns are relatively safe considering the following Riichi. So someone called Riichi with the 8 of characters. Imagine that you don't have suji to this, you don't have genbutsu, you have very few defensive techniques to play against this Riichi, but you do happen to have a 2 of characters in your hand. The earlier their discard was, the least they needed. So if you have no other defensive techniques to rely upon, discard the 2, discard the north, and discard the green dragon. That's basically the logic behind it. The earlier a player has discarded a tile, the safer it is to use as a defensive tile later on in the game when they're calling Riichi, for example. Opponent style. Now this has different types of expression depending on the client that you're using. In Mahjong Soul, you can look up your opponent's winning rate, second place rate, third place rate, fourth place rate. So you know if they have a majority of second places, you know that they're probably not going to risk much to get the first place. In Final Fantasy XIV, if you keep encountering the same people, you probably will realize what their play style is generally if you queue enough times. So what this section is telling you is that it's also important if the player pool is not too large that you're constantly encountering randoms. If you know the type of opponent you are facing, you may want to take that into account. For example, if you know that your opponent is an old-fashioned player who calls Riichi only when they have a good weight hand, you can rely heavily on suji theories. Or, if you're playing against me, you know that I tend to discard penchans quite easily. So if I call Riichi and I'm waiting on my winning hand, you can safely or with a certain degree of safety expect that you won't deal in with a penchan. But then again, there are certain types of players that do not have a style and are completely unpredictable. They're just their style changes with their mood. I can think of someone from my link shell that is basically there just to have some fun with Mahjong, and they just roll with the punches. They don't have a style. They just go with the flow, basically. There's a part here about defending against open hands, and I highlighted this one specifically. When he's doing a flush hand, he starts discarding tiles in the suit he's supposedly collecting. So if you suspect that the player is flushing and he's been discarding character tile after character tile on the first row, and then he starts discarding pins and after pins after pins, and after a while he finally discards one bamboo, you know that guy is probably in tempai or very close to tempai for a bamboo flush. So at this point, avoid discarding bamboos because you will deal into their flush. Let's see what else have I highlighted here. Discard a punchy. Well, this seems interesting. Discard a punchy. Discard a tile in the same suit. The neighborhood of the last discard is safe. Chi. Discard a tile in a different suit. The neighborhood of the last discard is dangerous, and pawn weight can be anything. Improving the weight. got a bunch of good melding judgments here, which I have not deemed to highlight because they're probably being drilled into my skull at this point. This one seems important enough though. Melding Judgment 4. If you have a concealed set of value tiles, you can meld with the chip and saw hand. So, basically, lots of, let's say, you have double east, you have lots of door in your hand, just meld with whatever you can get your hands on. You drew a couple of lucky tiles, so stick with them and cross the finish line. This goes into Kan judgment. In principle, your hand in principle, oh my god, I need to get some water. Give me a second. So, we're nearing the end of the highlights, but this is still a rather important one because Kan will often appear and people are often too quick to just slam the Kan button. Let's go into something that justifies Kanning. In principle, your hand needs to be close to ready to justify making a concealed quad. When not making a concealed quad, calling Kan comes with some cost, including you may lose safety tiles, of course, you lose 4 of them. The new Dora may go to the opponents, that's what you should keep in mind. Your Kan can help you as much as it can your adversary, so do not do, whether if it's concealed or open, do not do reckless Kans because you might end up giving your opponent like an extreme amount of value. What else? Grand strategies are more specific type scenarios. In South 4, the first thing you need to do before the hand begins is to figure out the point differences between you and the other players. Exactly. Improving the placement by Ron or Tsumo. Here, sometimes there's an important crossroads. When you've drawn a shit hand and it's South 4, there's not much you can do except hope for the game to win as fast as possible, or someone else to lose so badly that they take your 4th place. If you end up drawing it to a good hand, you can save that hand by trying to maximize its value and overtake for 3rd or 2nd or maybe even 1st, like I've seen recently. So in South 4, the idea of efficiency is less important than maximizing your value. After all, it's your last chance to get out of 4th, so might as well do it in the only way that can possibly be done, with an extremely valuable hand. And here is what I like to call Hail Mary plays. But yeah, it should be coming to a close. This should be about it. Just because I'm skipping these pages, it doesn't mean that their contents are not useful. This is a very useful book with almost no filler. You should read it from start to finish if you want to get good at Mahjong. And it's only an introduction to Mahjong anyway. Oh, I didn't make any highlights in this last chapter of the book because I don't play Mahjong offline, even though I have this Mahjong table. You can consider this to be a prop, which expresses my love for Mahjong rather than something to be used frequently. I have it because I find it to be absolutely beautiful, and it inspires me every time I enter my living room. But in reality, I don't really get any offline playing, any chances to do any offline playing. So actually, the only time I get to experience a little taste of offline playing is when I'm watching the M League. Even though I'm not playing myself, I get to see some of the stuff that is mentioned on this chapter. Like splitting the wall. Well, splitting the wall not so much, because they use the latest automatic Mahjong table technology that does everything automatically for them, but drawing tiles, etiquette on the table and stuff like that. All of that are things present in offline play that you can appreciate while watching the M League. And yeah, I do believe that's it. Recommends further readings at the end, but I would say if you have a good understanding of this book, the Riichi book one, I do strongly recommend everyone trying to get into this game, especially if they enjoy it and if they're not just doing it to get the Mahjong enthusiast or Mahjong master titles or whatever you want out of Mahjong, to read this book, because it's absolutely invaluable. It's a very fun read if you are into Mahjong, and you'll come to realizations that you probably didn't even know before you started reading this book. So yeah, that's enough yapping for now. This is going to be, I think, a couple of hours of yapping and editing. Let's see how it goes, and if it even sees the light of day. And hopefully the camera angle was also right, because I didn't check throughout. But anyway, once I get enough, if this goes well and if I manage to get a good edit out of this, I might do the same for this, which is my second favorite Mahjong book, and go over some of my favorite chapters, problems, and all that. This one is also a bit more, it's larger and it has more eye candy as well, but do not be fooled by the eye candy and the anime illustrations. This is still a very much more complex book than Riichi book 1, and it's been very useful. I have greatly benefited from it. I'm still not fully done with this one because it's really hard, and sometimes I don't comprehend the decisions taken by Chiyozaku in order to solve their questions. But this one I have a good understanding of, so I could probably get into it, and it has helped me immensely. I love this book. Not only is it useful, but it's also very good looking and definitely worth printing out. Okay, that's all I got for now. So, see you all next time.